Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Real Talk, IQRA TV's flagship current affairs show. With us today in the studio we have Ibtihal Bsis and Shiraz Maher to discuss how the war in Syria has impacted the British Muslim community. Ibtihal, obviously since the Syrian war has begun, it's reaching 5 years. And ever since it has begun, and earlier in part one we discussed with Shiraz how a number of Britons have gone to fight with different groups in Syria. How has that affected laws or influenced laws such as the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act? Because in the very short build-up to that bill, which eventually became law, I believe in February, there was a lot of talk about Syria-related terrorism, when the terror alert was increased to, I forgot, what is the actual classification? It was to high alert. Well, I forgot the actual word.
It's severe.
It was severe, that's it. It was severe.
Yes.
And there was a lot of rhetoric and language linked to Syria.
Yes.
Can you please touch upon why that was the case?
I mean, there are a lot of inconsistencies, there are a lot of questions, and anybody that questions government is deemed to be a radicalizer or somebody that has an us and them mentality. Effectively, we have to remember, because our memory has become very short, that there was a period that people were supported in the way that people were supported when they went to fight against Gaddafi in Libya. I remember one student was filmed making his crossing by car in order to deliver an ambulance and also some medical care, but he was armed as well and fighting in that way. And he was supported and there was no problem. Then suddenly everything changed around 2013, and I think there is a direct correlation between people saying this is becoming more Islamic, this is having a very Islamic identity, and ISIS turning up. Now, some can say it's a coincidence. I beg to differ. I'm not sure that it's a coincidence that ISIS came. Suddenly it was sectarianism, terrorism, civil war in a space of a few months. And the revolution was going very well, and Bashar al-Assad was losing a lot. I mean, out of the 32 runways that he had in order to move his planes to drop his devastation and death indiscriminately on people, he was only left with 8. And his people were defecting left, right and centre. Then Russia comes along and we have vetoes.
We'll get to that.
Yes.
We'll get to that.
But effectively, sorry, effectively, we have to ask questions about that. And look, people were watching the devastation. I don't support people going out there. I don't think, and actually the Syrians themselves were saying, and I'll use the Arabic, خُذُوا الرِّجَالَ هَاتُوا السِّلَاحَ. Take the men, give us weaponry. That's what they were looking for. But when you see devastation in the way that you do, when you see women who have been violated, I mean, I always tell this story, it will stay with me forever, where the women in Utma, when I came in, said to me, we have a sister who was 9 months pregnant. They opened up her belly, excuse me, I don't like using the, and they took the fetus and started throwing it around like a football in the field. When you hear these kind of stories, the kind of devastation, children being violated at the age of 5, then tortured to death with their eyes gouged out. I don't forget Ghouta. I was there when Ghouta was happening. I saw the devastation myself. When they're killing children while they're asleep in their bed. I can imagine people looking around thinking the international community is not doing anything. I need to go out there and help. I'm not saying it's right. And we learned lessons from Palestine that it doesn't do anything. It actually makes the situation worse. We need another solution. And ISIS are a problem, but America is by no means the solution, and the intervention we have is by no means the solution. So I think there's a lot of mileage being used in order to implement a particular strategy on Muslims in this country and throughout the West.
We'll get to military intervention from foreign powers towards the end of the show. I believe we've got Majid Freeman, our third guest via Skype. Assalamu alaikum, Majid, you there?
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Can you hear me, bro?
I can hear you absolutely clearly. Majid, basically we're talking about how the war in Syria has affected certain policies that have been pushed by the British government, namely the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act. Now, you visited Syria a number of times, and there was even an article in The Guardian which basically said nearly a quarter of charities that are currently under investigation from the Charity Commission are Muslim, and out of those charities, 5 were directly linked to Syria. As an aid worker, and speaking to your peers and your colleagues, do you feel that certain policies and the CTS has affected aid workers going to Syria from Britain?
Yeah, of course, definitely, 100%. what we found when we were going to Syria was, when we actually went on the ground, we found that a lot of the Syrian people were relying on British charities that are bringing aid. So the first time when I went, I remember I didn't go that inside Syria, so I thought there must be international aid around.
Yeah.
It's not in this area maybe. We spoke to a few people and they said, you know what, there's no international aid down here. We're just relying on whatever you lot bring. I thought that this can't be the case because we always hear about all these countries, Oxfam and all these other charities, non-Muslim charities and all these international aid that we always hear about. We thought that there must be some aid on the ground inside.
But one of the allegations, obviously, investigators within the Charity Commission and the government itself have said that some of these charities are linked to extremist groups in Syria. Others go off with an aid convoy and then eventually stay there to fight. How true are those claims? That's the first thing. And secondly, does that mean as a result of the CTS, aid work has decreased from Britain?
Of course, because like let's say 2012, 2013, when we were going to Syria, we had hundreds of ambulances that were leaving from the UK and that were going to Syria. The doctors in the hospital in Aleppo, where Dr. Abbas Khan was at, the main doctor down there said that they were relying on British. Around 70 to 80% of the ambulances that were coming into Syria were from the UK.
Okay.
Yeah, and they needed ambulances because the ambulances were being bombed and being shot by the regime. So the ambulances were crucial to hospitals. Imagine a hospital without ambulances. There were many hospitals like this in Syria. So what we found was because of the pressure by the government, maybe around 70% of the aid workers from the UK stopped going to Syria, stopped going to that region, even though they knew they were the only lifeline.
That's a drastic decrease. That's a huge decrease.
Everyone was scared. Everyone was scared, thinking that if we were to go, we'll get linked to terrorism. The charity's reputation could get tarnished. All it takes is for your charity name to come on the front page. Later on, you can get killed. However, everyone will remember you being linked to extremism.
Okay, let me just ask you two very quick questions, and inshallah, try and make the answers as concise as possible.
Okay.
With regards to, obviously, the charities which allegedly have links to extremist groups, I mean, for our viewers who don't know this, Majid Freeman was with Alan Henning, who was sadly executed by ISIS last year. Do you think incidents like this raises legitimate concerns from the government to basically prevent aid workers from going? Because we may have cases like Alan Henning, and that's the first question. And secondly, do you know of any cases where aid workers have either been harassed by the authorities or security services, or aid workers that have gone out there and fear coming back?
Of course, like what happens is all these laws and all these policies, the prevent policies which are getting passed, I think David Cameron, I think, is probably radicalizing the Muslims more than anybody else, more than ISIS, by passing all these laws and prevent passing all these laws, putting all this pressure on Muslims. Muslims feel that if we were to stay here, even we've seen an increase in mothers and families also leaving. They feel that if they stay here, they could have their children taken off them, and as a result, we've seen more and more mothers leaving from down here. And I know of a personal, a colleague, a fellow aid worker. He'd be shocked to hear the story. That I advised him that when the police come to see you, be careful because they may try to entrap you. So he was very gullible, and he was just started this aid work. So he thought I must be exaggerating. It can't really be that bad. But what I told him that be careful, watch what you say when they come to see you. Anyways, the following week they came to see him, and he said, I've got no problem with seeing them. I've not done anything wrong. He was answering the questions in regards to his aid work, how his experience was when he went to Syria. And out of the blue, they said to him that, you know what, we're sorry, we can't give any military help. We can't give them any arms, we can't give them any weapons. And he was puzzled, thinking, out of the blue, why are you mentioning this to me for? Like, what's this got to do with the conversation which we're having right now in regards to my aid work? That's when it clicked to him, what I mentioned to him, and he asked them to leave his house straight away. And if he carried on going with the flow, like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, etc., etc., he could have easily entrapped him and said that he was there and he wanted the Syrians to receive military aid and stuff like that.
Okay.
So this is one of many incidents, and these kind of incidents, there's a lot of aid workers are married with families. So when they experience these kind of things, they back off, even though they know that the Syrians rely on us because they've got no international community helping them on the ground. The children are freezing.
Do you know of any
in the
cases,
winter.
Majid, do you know of any cases, sorry to interrupt, do you know of any cases of British aid workers that are out there currently in Syria and they fear coming back because they may be arrested, their passports may be confiscated, their citizenship may be revoked, which are all legitimate parts of the CTS Act?
Of course, there's Brother Takir to mention.
Yeah.
He's very famous brother, like a lot of people know him because of his aid work on the ground.
Okay.
He's been in Syria for, I think, over 2 years now. He came on Channel 4 as well. He mentioned how his passports, his daughter was having issues with the passport as well because his daughter was born there. He's having issues with his passport as well. And he feels that if he was to come back down here now in the UK, he could get arrested. So this brother is doing amazing work down there. But if he did want to see his family, what would happen in that situation if he can't come back? There must be so many other brothers who are there doing aid work. As you know, people don't only go to Syria to fight. People go for so many other things as well. For example, doctors, they go for the humanitarian aid work, etc., etc. But we don't hear about this in the media. All we hear is British Muslims going to Syria equals ISIS.
Okay.
I try to make it very simple, but that's not the case.
Majid, stay on the line. We will come back to you later on the show. Shiraz, the CTS Act, in the build-up to the bill, there was a lot of political language and rhetoric with regards to an ISIS ideology, a poisonous Islamist ideology. Let me just ask you a very frank question. How central is the issue of ideology in the causes of radicalization? Because we hear the prevalent argument is online radicalization. Mm-hmm. Is the issue of radicalization multifaceted? Is it multi-causal? Or is it really ideology at the center of it? What are your views and what have you found in your work?
So I think, again, this is one of the areas where public debate becomes very binary. There are certain commentators who say, look, this is Islam, the Quran is fundamentally intolerant, and therefore look at all these guys like ISIS, they're just doing what their book tells them to, and that's it. And then you get this other side that says, it's got nothing to do with Islam, and it's no ideology here. The reality is, in terms of what you say, drivers of radicalization, all the things we've been talking about play a role. Of course, when we see Muslim children being killed by barrel bombs, it affects us, it hurts us, it agitates the emotions, and that's why people have been really connected. Why does it connect us more? Because we see this bare suffering. We're Muslims, there's a connection there on the basis of our religion and our identity. So all of this stuff plays a role. Of course it does. Ideology plays a role in that cog as well. Now, for each individual, different factors play different roles to differing degrees. Of course they do. So I'm in the process of actually creating what I essentially call like a typology of individuals who've gone based on over 100 interviews I've done with fighters and the various other material I've collected around.
When will that be ready?
Soon, inshallah. It's under progress.
Look forward to it.
So the idea is, look, you can't just say, and I think Majid touched upon it in his remarks as well, is that this idea that anyone who goes off to Syria is firstly going to be a fighter. That's not the case. He mentioned people have gone as doctors, as aid workers. All of that is true. The other point is that even the fighters who have gone over, it's not just the case that some guy sitting in his bedroom in Antwerp, for example, or in Paris or in Bradford and says, I really want to go join ISIS and behead somebody, so let's go. Right? It's a nonsense position. So the reality is, again, that people are being motivated by different things. And I would suggest, again, throughout the course of the conflict, I've mentioned at the start of this program, the waves and the cycles of conflict has gone through, different things have been very, very dominant. And I noticed when I started doing some of the early interviews with individuals who had gone, principally they were talking about in those early stages what the point that the sister was mentioning, that look, no one was helping these people. Here are people suffering, dying, being killed, raped, murdered, and just horrific suffering that was taking on a huge industrial scale. Someone had to go and help them. And they were very, very strongly motivated by this sense of humanitarian concern to go and to serve the Syrian people. Now, some of them interpreted their sort of obligation or duty in terms of helping as to be a fighter. Others took it in other ways. Over time, you've seen different narratives, and clearly today, if someone went off to ISIS in the last few weeks and I managed to speak to them, typically from them you hear the strong sense of the Khilafah is here, we need to be part of it. So you see a different narrative, a different motivation.
Okay, you said that the debate appears to be very binary. It appears to be quite binary from our very government, who seems to dismiss foreign policy grievances and other issues, but specifically focuses on this Islamist ideology. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, look, I think, again, the government says guilty, as you know, people who go on sort of talk shows on BBC and all the rest that get stuck in these very, very, it's all or nothing approaches. Again, to my mind, look, of course, the war in Iraq had a huge role in angering people, in politicizing people, in making British Muslims question their position and so on. That of course, plays a role. There's also other factors that have played roles, and some of the discussion our own community has where what we say, we put all the blame on the government as well. Sometimes I think we go too far that way. So it's constantly give and take, but it's certainly the case that we should engage with the government, that we should be talking to the government and saying, fine, you're making requests of British Muslims, but we're making requests of you too. And I think that's the key point here, that no one really talks to anyone in these debates, and the government is as guilty of that as the community is, so that we retreat into our community and say, this government is persecuting British Muslims, this government is making our lives difficult. And that is clearly a feeling that ordinary people within the community have. It's not just people you could dismiss as saying they're Islamists or they have an agenda. My family doesn't live in Birmingham, my parents don't live, so I'm regularly out of London. I go to Birmingham. It's another side of the Muslim community in Britain, and you see that in ordinary people.
Similar sentiments.
Similar sentiments, exactly. So there needs to be this, but then the response is to pull back. For example, let me just give you one example. This happened here and in the United States, where mistakes or wrongs that the government has undertaken are then met with, okay, let's put up a wall of silence, let's not engage. Actually, why don't we engage them more and say, listen, you're messing this up, you're misunderstanding. And I've tried to do that a lot in my work. It's a matter of public record, it's in the Hansard. I've given evidence twice to the British Parliament sort of Home Affairs and Foreign Affairs Committee on the foreign fighters to say, look, you can't treat everyone like a terrorist who goes out there. Clearly, individuals who have gone have committed, some of them have committed terrible crimes, but you can't have a blanket policy. You have to be intelligent about this, you have to be smart about it. You have to look at it in a very clear fashion. So someone who goes at the age of 17 whimsically with 3 of his friends because they think this is a really great invention, it's a bit like Call of Duty. It's very different to someone who's going out there with this very clear desire to engage in some of the worst crimes that have taken place. So we need a nuanced approach, and rather than to feel under siege, which I understand many people do, I would encourage everyone to have a greater dialogue and say, okay, we will do things, we need the government to do things. And ultimately, and I imagine you're going to touch on it, is the issue of, what the government said, British values. That's fine if we can start to have a discussion what those values are, but then to also say to the government, we will adhere to those values, but we need you to adhere to them too. And that means the rule of law and various things that people feel aggrieved about.
Ibtihal, you were delivering national workshops on the CTS.
Yes.
The BBC picked up on it.
Yes.
And without mentioning any names, some indicated that this was a bit of an isolationist, scaremongering kind of strategy. Now that Prevent is statutory under the CTS. Yes. What was the experience you found in your workshops when you were delivering them up and down the country? Did you have general people, like layman people who weren't Islamists, but layman people with legitimate concerns that felt that they were silenced over the Syrian conflict?
Well, now what the government has done, and their own people have tried to reason with them, not least people like Eliza Manningham-Buller, the ex-MI5 chief for Tony Blair, who said that Prevent was completely unworkable, or PVE, Prevent Violent Extremism. Mark Sageman, who actually was an expert and spoke to the government, and they took his findings and started to create Prevent. and talked about what are signs of radicalization, did a complete U-turn. And when he did a complete U-turn, they ignored him. People like Sir Peter Fahey, who said that he is concerned that we are becoming a police state and that we are now policing thoughts, and other people who are, even the MI5 wrote a report in 2008 saying that generally, principally from their experience, they're finding that people who go out to commit acts of terror are not particularly religious. They come from all sorts of different backgrounds, so you can't just home in. Government has refused to take the advice of people in the know and people that have worked with government and are in government. And it's all political parties. So it's very difficult now for the Muslim community who do feel like they're under siege now to accept that there is this legislation. It's very strong. We understand that 6 children now are being referred to the Channel programme a day since this has become a statutory duty. And I don't understand how a girl who is 2 years old, who has started singing Zayn Bika, Anasheeds, and suffers from autism, can then be referred to prevent officers. How has this come about? And how have the government brought about, they won't tell us what the signs of extremism are. And I've heard of prevent officers telling teachers, oh, it's what you think it might be. It's what you know, you will know. I find that absolutely very concerning and very disconcerting. So I think government just doesn't want to listen. We'd love to be able, they say we will engage, we will challenge these voices, but they shut us down. And I think mine, along with a number of people, is a case in point that when we do go and speak, they will say, oh, this person radicalizes. They took everything I said, incidentally, out of context. And they said that at one point that I was actually speaking to children. One of the people that was hosting the workshop was an ex-mayor of that particular area. There were counsellors there were teachers there were doctors there were professionals there. It's entirely patronising at best, but at worst, it actually puts an entirely powerless community under these kind of suspicions, and it's very concerning.
Okay, I would have loved to have continued with that point, but we've got less than 2 minutes to wrap up. Shiraz, where do you see the Syrian war going, and where do you see it affecting the British Muslim community in 30 seconds?
Unfortunately, I would say the Syrian conflict will continue for many years, if not decades longer. You will see a deterioration of this conflict, and unfortunately, with the entry of Russia into this now, we are entering a new chapter, and I would dare say a new phase of individuals who will go over to fight against the Russians.
Ibtihal.
I want to be more hopeful. I think the West needs to get out of our countries, along with Russia. And I think when they talk about us finding our own political destiny, they really need to leave us alone and find that political destiny, not interfere in our countries. And the revolution was doing very well. It was going very well until we had Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, David Cameron, now Russia, China, everybody, the Arab League, just get involved, and now it's a complete mess. I think who decides the political destiny? The people themselves need to decide that, not be forced, as Obama and Putin have recently said in a summit, have said, oh, Syria must remain secular. Well, who are you to decide?
But they won't be able to impose that. That's the key. They won't be able to impose that. And, you know, I just need to push back. I don't think the West actually is involved, and that's a lot of the problem right now in Syria.
Well, we've had Geneva 1, 2 and 3.
Majid, you there? Majid?
Yes.
You there? Quickly,
Yeah, I'm here.
in 20,
Can you hear me?
Yes, 20, 30 seconds. Tell me, where do you think the war in Syria is going? Very, very quickly.
I think it's going to be dragging on for quite some time now. We'll probably see more people fleeing from all parts of the world as the Russians and everyone is involved now. It's like the way that everyone sees it, the Muslims say it's a war on Islam, to be frank. And we've seen all the countries get involved. Even China wants to get involved now and have their peace. David Cameron wants to get involved and drone as well. So it's not going to get any better, but with hardship comes ease. Inshallah, at the end of it, it'll work out for the best, inshallah.
And very quickly, you've said that you foresee it continuing for quite a while, and so has Shiraz. Now, if that's the case, we're going to see more refugees coming into Europe and a more need for aid. Do you see an issue there? So as a humanitarian crisis...
the truth is that the international community are not sending no aid on the ground in Syria. And they're stopping British Muslim charities who want to send aid inside Syria. They're making it very difficult for us. The bottom line is that the people, they'll see as an incentive to come towards Europe because they're not receiving no aid. It's winter and we'll see more and more children die on the streets of Syria because they're not receiving no clothes, no food. Okay. And those British Muslims who are trying to get aid to them are being called XYZ. We're being treated the same as the fighters are.
Okay.
So it's a very tricky situation. Okay. It doesn't help the situation, and these are the kind of things which radicalizes other Muslims who are watching what's happening, who's leaving, and they're making their own way or helping in whatever way they want to help.
Okay. Majid, Jazakallah Khair. I want to thank all my guests who attended today for their much needed input into this very important topic. And that is all for today. Until next week, Thursday 6 p.m. at the very same time. Please do join us again. Continue tweeting us your thoughts at IQRA TV, #RealTalk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.